All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to World of Warcraft. Today we're looking at a one-button rotation sequence for a Holy Paladin. Now, using a one-button sequence with a healer is sometimes a little tricky, but this one is super solid, and I would love to show it to you guys. Now, this sequence uses Gnome Sequencer Advanced, or Enhanced. Gnome Sequencer is an add-on you can get from Curse. Search for GSE, and once you get that installed, you can type /GSE in order to pull up the GSE main menu. Now, to use the sequence, you'll need to go into the Sequences tab to import it and then set a keybind for it. We'll take a look at both of those. If we go into Sequences, there's an import string that I'll post either down in the description. If it doesn't fit, I'll post a link to it, but it will import this Deck Holy sequence. Now, what Gnome Sequencer does is it creates a series of actions that you can bind to a key, and what happens is when you hit that key, it's going to try and fire the first action. Once that is done, it'll try and fire the next action, and then the next one, and then the next one, and so on, all the way down the list until you get to the end, and then it loops back and starts again. So if you bind this to a key, you can tap over and over again. You can bind your entire rotation onto a single key. Now, to import a sequence, you click the import button at the top and you paste the sequence. Let me pull this up. And so if you paste in the import string there and hit import, then it will pop up with the import. It'll add it to the list. Since I already have it, it comes up with this window asking me to merge or replace. And we'll just go ahead and close that. Now, this one in particular requires a little bit of additional setup. In particular, there's a macro that needs to be created. So if we type /m, that'll pull up the macro tab, and you can go in and there's a blessing macro, which I will post the text to down below, but that needs to be created in your character specific macros. So once that's created, that will help the sequence run a little better. That handles all your blessings. Now, once your sequence is imported and your blessing macro is in place, you can go ahead and go into the Keybindings tab in order to create your keybindings. Now, I already have my keybindings set up, so I'll go ahead and just create a new one. I use the square brackets for this. Sometimes I also bind it to the mouse wheel, but in this case, we're going to use the square brackets, and so we'll bind the sequence to the left square bracket, and then we do have a shift modifier as well, so we'll create a new keybind for the shift left square bracket, and then bind the sequence to that as well. Now, once the sequence is imported and once you're in a key, you want to go ahead and pick 2 ranged DPS and put beacons on them. If you don't have 2 ranged DPS, pick whoever's squishiest. So if you have 3 ranged DPS, pick the 2 squishiest range. If you have only 1 ranged and 2 melee, or all 3 melee, and just pick whoever for those extra beacons is going to need the most healing, or whoever you think might need the most healing. So tankier classes like Beastmaster Hunters or Retribution Paladins or Death Knights are probably going to need a little bit less healing than something like a mage or a rogue. So prioritize the squishier DPS in that regard. You're also going to want to set your tank as focus. Now, in this case, I'm going to be putting my beacons on these 2 PvP training dummies, and I am going to set this Peacekeeper over here as my focus target. And then you come on in and start spamming the sequence, and that is it. Now, how the sequence works is that it basically goes through your entire melee rotation. Each time you tap the key, it casts a different spell, and then when it gets the opportunity to spend some holy powder, if you don't have a specific target that needs healing, it's going to cast Light of Dawn and sort of blanket your group with a nice, even, balanced level of healing. You can see we're healing close to 3 million HPS right now as part of our initial burst, and that should stabilize a bit over 1 million HPS. And I'm only at 630 item level, or so 632, I think. So that's not coming from a place of tremendous gear. Now, if you do need some priority healing, the sequence includes some mouse over healing. So if you have a target who's getting low, like this dummy over here, you can put your mouse over that target, either over their character, over their nameplate, or over your party frames, and that will, instead of casting Light of Dawn on the entire group, cast Word of Glory just on that player. And that's going to be a higher throughput healing, so that'll actually boost your total overall healing numbers to do that. But what you'll find is that that's not always necessary. If you're doing the passive healing, then particularly in times where there's not a lot of damage coming out, you can keep the entire group topped up very easily just by spamming Light of Dawn instead. Now, if you find yourself in a position that you do have an opportunity to do some DPS, you're confident you're not going to need to be doing much healing, you can hold down the Shift key in order to spam Shield of the Righteous. This is just a DPS boost, and a rather significant one. I thought about putting this as sort of the default action and requiring and requiring you to either mouse over or hold shift for healing. But as a healer, I felt it would be better for the sequence to sort of default to healing and then have the DPS require additional action. So you can hold down shift to spam Shield of the Righteous instead of doing healing with your holy power. Now, this sequence does provide for a very level healing profile. It's going to essentially be pumping, 200k HPS onto each target in your group all the time. And so this is going to keep everybody nicely topped up. But when damage comes out that exceeds that, you're going to run into some spikes. And unfortunately, that's probably the biggest weakness of this, is that we don't have any major cooldowns to sort of come back from big spikes. So in order to handle that, you're going to have to know the dungeons a little bit, and that just comes through reading up on them and practicing them, knowing when those damage spikes are coming. Now, you'll want to communicate with your group. So, for example, at the end of Rookery, there are some Grievous stacks that come off the Ascendants. You can dispel those and you can heal through them, but it's helpful if someone has the ability to cleanse themselves, either through a racial ability or a class ability. It's a magic debuff, or can pop a potion or a personal defensive until you have the time to sort of come back from that. And so, as with any kind of healing, communication with your group and knowing the dungeons you're going to be running is going to be key to being successful at a higher level. Now, in terms of cooldown usage, we do have a few options. The first one is our Aura Mastery. That's not included in the sequence at all because it's important to have some amount of manual control over big cooldowns. Now, Aura Mastery is more of a defensive cooldown. It's going to prevent all damage taken by your group by 15% for 8 seconds. And it also boosts your healing on those targets by 10%, I think, due to one of the talents we have. We also have our Lay on Hands for a big single target heal, and that has a 7-minute cooldown, but that cooldown is reduced by our rotation, so you'll be able to actually use that every 90 seconds or so if you need it, so you can go ahead and use that when you need to. We also have our Divine Shield and our Divine Protection for our own personal usage, and then there are cooldowns that are going to be firing off fairly regularly throughout the sequence. I bound Wings into the sequence because that's on a 1-minute cooldown. Anything under 90 seconds I sort of treat as just part of the core rotation. And so that provides a 15-minute burst of healing every minute. And then your blessings, which are on a 45-second cooldown, are also built into the sequence, and those will provide either a burst of healing or a strong defensive for 30 seconds every 45 seconds. So that'll be up the majority of the time doing something, but there's 4 different blessings it cycles through. In addition to that, you have your healing potions. I run Cave Dweller's Delight because I haven't found that the combat potions are particularly useful as a healer. So that's my combat potion, which functions as another emergency heal. And then we have all of our stuns, our interrupts, our defensives, things like that. So I think in the sequence as it's posted, or in the talents as they're posted, I have Repentance spec'd, but you can swap that over to Blinding Light. Generally, I run Blinding Light in Keys. I just had that flipped for another thing I was doing. But you'll want to make sure you have your your Hammer of Justice and your Blinding Light ready as your sort of big common CC abilities. And then of course we can kick. As a healer, you'll have a strong dispel, so you'll want to make sure that's bound and that you're watching people for the dispels. And then we've got our Blessing of Freedom and Blessing of Sacrifice as well. Now, the other thing is that we almost never run out of mana. Possibly in a long raid fight, we would run out of mana, but I've never run out of mana in a key using this sequence. You can see we've been doing this for almost 6 minutes now. We're still at 40% mana, so this is probably good for about a 10-minute fight. So mana is not really a thing. As far as gearing and statting goes, you'll want to get your 2 and 4 set as soon as you can out of the new keys, out of the new raid, and then you're going to want to prioritize haste and mastery, although crit is also very good for us, and versatility is just fine as well. So you can see that I prioritize haste and mastery there, and you can see I'm 632 out of 641. I've got some retribution pieces that boost like trinkets, for example, but I don't have good healing trinkets, and I'm still using auction house weapons. So hopefully I'll get some drops there soon, but that should boost the healing and the output of the sequence even further. But you can see that we finished up that 6-minute test at 1.46 million HPS, so that's really solid. And I'm really pleased with how the sequence works in keys. Let's jump into a +6 priory that I did and take a look at it in action. Go ahead and run this at a little bit faster speed because unfortunately, or fortunately or unfortunately, it was a pretty clean run. And so you can see that we're charging in, and I am starting to spam the sequence as soon as we get into combat. And I'm just letting, as long as nobody's getting low, I'm letting the Light of Dawn do some healing on everybody else. I'm using my cooldowns. I use my freedom here to clear some of these traps. And for the most part, the group isn't struggling. Now, that trap that I stepped in did put a nasty bleed on me, so I do end up using a potion there at the beginning. But again, that's one of many options for my own personal abilities there, and how to handle that. And then I make a point of using my freedom to clear more traps whenever I get the chance. And that kind of group utility is one of the really big advantages of using sequence like this, is you can focus on the mechanics. You can focus on how you can help your group in other ways. And so once again, I'm watching my positioning, watching my group members' health bars. When I see them getting low, I make sure to mouse over them so the sequence will heal the players who need the most healing. And otherwise, I am letting the sequence do its thing, and focusing on my positioning, on cooldown usage, on making sure I'm getting interrupts where I can, activating the dungeon buff for us. All right, so here we have the first mini boss upstairs, and this was my first time going right, but he does some pretty big AoE healing, or AoE damage on the group that you're going to need to heal through. And again, because there's not a significant amount of damage on a specific player, I'm just watching it. I'm hitting my dispels whenever I see the debuff come out, but otherwise the sequence takes care of all the healing for me. So again, this is a +6 priority, and I'm doing this at around 630 item level, so +6s will grant gear up to 658 between what drops and what you can upgrade. So there's certainly plenty of room for growth, and I think the sequence will serve well into those 10+ keys later on, and I'm really excited to keep playing with it. I hope you guys like it too. I'd love if you could give me a try and let me know how it goes for you. And so yeah, that's a +6 key that shows that this sequence is viable in those mid-level keys. And remember, I'm doing this at 630 item level, so there's plenty of room to grow and to expand those +6 keys. If you farm them out enough, you could get to like a 658 item level, probably 660 with some hero gear out of the vault. And so there's plenty of room to gear up further, and I think this sequence is going to serve well into those very high keys, 10+s. And so that's going to be it for today. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you have found this video helpful. Leave a like if you have, and subscribe if you'd like to see more. My name is the Koba, and I hope you have an epic day. I'll see you soon.